My name is Chrissy. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Western Australia, and I've been involved with this project, SeadragonSearch, since I was working on my master's, helping to develop the tools that we use that I'm going to talk more about in the presentation, and doing the initial launch of the project. From there, it snowballed into a PhD opportunity, which I was all too overjoyed to take and to move to Australia and to be able to actually use this data to begin to hopefully answer some questions about sea dragons. In SeadragonSearch, we're mainly focused on weedy and leafy sea dragons, since they're the two that live in shallower waters within recreational scuba limits. And these are the two species that my PhD work is focused on as well. So most of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about these guys. But just to cover it, there is the third species, the ruby sea dragon, which was just described in 2015. And because the ruby appears to live in deeper waters beyond recreational scuba diving limits, we just don't see as many photos of it. So technically, our project SeadragonSearch does accept photos of ruby sea dragons. There's a choice for that if you had one and if you wanted to submit one. But at this point, we just don't know enough about it and don't have enough data for it to be the main focus of the project. But they are beautiful and amazing. And we are curious about, what their distribution is and some other questions like that. So that is a possibility. But we're mostly going to focus on the weedy sea dragon and the leafy sea dragon. And I'd just like to start by talking about why SeadragonSearch came to be. It's a citizen science project that's aimed at answering questions about sea dragons across their entire range, which for the common sea dragon or the weedy sea dragon, that's basically almost the entire Great Southern Reef. And for the leafy sea dragon, from South Australia into Western Australia. They have bounced around between different categories over the years on the IUCN Red List, which assesses extinction risk for different species. The reason that they've sort of bounced around between different categories is because there just is not a lot of information about them. We just lack data from most places where they live. So they're currently categorized as least concern, both species, but that is a bit misleading in the way it sounds, because it's not that we're not concerned about them. It's just that we don't have enough information for them to meet the criteria for a higher category of threat. So that's sort of where the genesis of this project and the purpose comes from, is wanting to understand what kind of data do we need for extinction risk assessments like this, or for other types of conservation planning, and how can we go about getting that data. And just to look at the distributions that we currently understand for the three species, we have on the left the sea dragon distributions, and then here this is average sea surface temperature over this period of time. And the reason for putting these two side by side is to just point out the different latitudes that sea dragons are living at and the different temperature conditions that they're experiencing. And temperature is just one physical ocean variable that is different in different parts of the sea dragon's distribution. They're dealing with different current systems and different habitat types in different places depending on where they are. So this is why SeadragonSearch really wants to look distribution-wide at sea dragons to understand, for assessments like the Red List, we need to have a picture of what's happening with the entire distribution, but also for individual populations, they might have different challenges, they might have different needs, and so we want to be able to understand what's happening in different places. The furthest north sighting that's been reported in like the last 10 years was the Abrolhos Islands, and that came from a reliable source. So we're pretty sure that within the past decade, a leafy has been spotted up there. So we include it, but it's rare. Somebody said that they saw one a couple of weeks ago around Waterman's Bay, which is Perth area, but slightly like on the north part. No photo. So there's a lot of hearsay like that. At least not a photo that we've seen yet. So we still kind of include it as within the past decade and kind of a possibility, but no recent sightings from that far north. Yeah, good question. Getting back to the purpose of the project, imagining it and trying to figure out what it was that we wanted to do with it, we tried to think about things like the red list and what kind of information they're missing that they need to be able to reassess with a more robust data set. And so some of those gaps we were able to identify and think about them in terms of what we're able to accomplish with this project. And we hope that then that's going to feed into reassessments that will hopefully give a more accurate picture of to what extent these animals actually are threatened. Well, the way that this project works is that we invite people, anyone who takes photographs of sea dragons, to share them with us. And sea dragons have both weedy and leafy sea dragons have this unique patterning, like fingerprints between individuals. Once they become adults, mature at about a year of age, their patterns stabilize. And from that point on, you can match a sea dragon in photos by looking at its patterning.
What's the lifespan of a sea dragon?
Ooh, we're going to get to that. We're going to bring that up again in a few more slides. Yeah. That's the premise, is using their patterns to match them. And we partnered with a software developer called WildMe, who's based in Oregon in the US. And they helped us to develop a set of machine learning tools that help us to expedite this kind of matching. We're getting a lot of photos coming in from citizen scientists all across the Great Southern Reef-wide distribution. So we need to be able to handle the analyses of all of that data. And so this is where the machine learning pipeline helps us out. And so I'll just give you a brief overview of how that works. When we put a query photo into the system, it's going to locate the animal in the photo, and then it's going to isolate the head, and it's going to run matching on both the body and the head, and it's looking for a similar visual texture to other images that are already in the database. And so it'll find, usually it's a list of a top 12, sometimes less, that it thinks are good candidate matches for the query image, and it will return on the back end to us a list that looks like this. And then we can go through these and we can compare. And this part is done by the human eye. So it's my supervisor and me who are going through these matches and comparing them and trying to decide, is there a match within those suggested results? If there is, then that sea dragon will get added to that existing time series. And if there's not, we will assign a new individual ID. That's not something we do lightly when it's a new individual. We definitely, if it's not a population that's well established, we'll do some extra digging to make sure that it truly is a new animal before giving it that ID. And so that's the very quick version of how things work on the back end. And the goal is to end up with time series that look like this. This is an example for an individual from Rapid Bay. And the reason that I like this example is because it shows different things in the photos. You can see the brooding with eggs in December 2021, and then how it might be hard to see because these photos are a bit smaller, but how that brood is changing color and losing some eggs as we can see it aging into January of that year. And then we're getting into March, and the tail still looks sort of swollen and spongy, how they get when they're ready for an egg transfer. So that could be after finishing the last brood of the season. Maybe that dragon is going to have one more before the breeding season is over. The more photos we get that can fill in these gaps, the more we can understand that level of detail about what's happening. And then this animal wasn't seen again for a year. So this is really, when it's a time series like this that has gaps in it, it just really underscores how every photo counts. Because if this person hadn't submitted that one, then we might have thought that this dragon had moved on or was deceased. So the more photos we get, the better we understand the story of an individual. And this one was most recently sighted just last month, again with a brood. So we know that he's still going strong, at least as of last month.
And still there. It's been
still
there.
Yeah.
It's the same one. He's been for weeks and weeks now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we need people taking photos of him. So
Yes, the first is that.
Oh, that's interesting, because I'm going to get to that in a minute as well. That parasite loads is another thing that we're investigating. So But yeah, the other thing I like about this example is that all of the photos, almost all of them, come from different contributors. So again, just showing the power of if everybody is putting in what photos they have, even if that's only less than 10 photos, less than 5 photos, it can really help to fill in the puzzle pieces with some of these time series. And then from this individual level, we're scaling up to look at things like longevity, so lifespans in different places. I'll touch on that quickly. We need more data and more time to be able to conclusively say things about lifespans, but some observations at this point are that we have seen that they live longer than we previously thought, at least in cooler waters. So we have one sea dragon in Tasmania who has been sighted over a period of 16 years. So we know that they can live till 16. That's just one, that's N equals 1. So it's not, we can't say average expectancies and things like that. But yeah, there's that example. And then there's a few other sea dragons at that same site in Tasmania that are 12 and 13-year-olds, compared to most of the ones that we're seeing, for example, in New South Wales are around 6 years old. In Western Australia, more like 4 years old. So, but the more data that we're getting, the more we'll be able to say something conclusive about that. And that's a paper that my supervisor is going to lead, and she's amazing. So that's going to be a really good one to keep an eye out for. Specific things that I'm looking at in my PhD are population sizes, reproduction, and parasite loads. So photographs that show a parasite on the sea dragon, definitely want those. Yeah.
Question about when the sea dragon goes from like juvenile into adult size-wise, do they continue growing? Or once they get to like the adult stage, that's kind of like then, like with the one that you've cited for 16, or has been cited for 16 years, it's like the same size, it's not changed for that long? Or?
For that particular sea dragon, we haven't done measurements as part of our project, so I can't speak to that specific one, but in general, they do seem to mature and stop growing at about 1 year old.
Right.
So yeah.
So it's pretty fast worrying up until that adult stage, and then it's because out of their first born or in the juvenile stage, they're tiny, and then within a year they're at the stage.
Yeah. So relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There's some juveniles actually in Perth that one of our regulars has been photographing, really, really small, just hatched.
Yeah.
And already after only a couple of weeks, they've changed so much.
Yeah.
So, and so that's kind of an overview of how things work on the back end. And then I just want to give you guys a sense of where we're at, because the project launched on October 1st of 2020. We just turned 3 this year. And so we have seen some really great data come in for certain locations. There's other locations that we're still trying to build out. So I thought I would start with something close to home. And I'm going to show you a few of these discovery curves. And basically they are showing for the number of encounters that are submitted. And I'll define an encounter as just one sighting of one dragon. From one dive, and then the number of individuals identified. So basically the number marked and essentially digitally tagged. And so kind of thinking about this terminology that we've all heard so much the past few years about flattening the curve, it's kind of similar with this, where once we see the curve start to level off, that's telling us that we're starting to get a handle on that population, because even as people are submitting more encounters, we're not seeing as many new individuals. Definitely doesn't mean that it's time to stop collecting data, because we need to keep going to be able to monitor what's happening into the future. But so what this curve is showing us is that for Rapid Bay, we have 155 encounters. That's good, but it's not super robust. So we see this slope still is pretty steep. We're still discovering new individuals as we're getting more encounters.
Seems like a lot, but I'm glad it was in 3 years from 155. Hell, it seems like there's a lot of great, is it? But it's just more than I would have thought. But surprising, that's like that.
Well, keep in mind that the photos are from all different time points. So there's photos from the early 2000s mixed in with this. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's why we unfortunately can't just take this to say how many are at a site. Much more complicated analyses that I'm in the middle of right now compared to, for example, this site in Tasmania, which has over 2,000 encounters and is a good example of what the curve looks like when it starts to flatten off, and we're not seeing very many new individuals, even as we're continuing to get lots of new encounters for this site. So when the curve starts to look like this, it gives me an indication that this is a robust enough data set for this site that I can start to implement some of the analyses to estimate the population sizes. So this is what we would love to see for all the sites, for at least for a few sites per state, because we do want to be able to make those comparisons about what's happening in different parts of their distribution. So that's an example of one that we have a pretty good handle on, and putting them next to each other just so you can see sort of the different slopes in each of those lines side by side. And then just to also give a sense of what's happening in other parts of Australia. That population, I'm just going to actually go back. This population in Vishnu, the number of individuals that we've identified is almost 200. And so that's not the population number. That's just all the individuals we've ever identified from that site. But that's compared to Flinders, we're at almost 800 marked individuals. And at this site in Western Australia, almost 1,200. So these are much bigger populations compared to the ones in Tasmania. And that's why, even though we have so many encounters for these sites, it's taking a while for that curve to level off. We've started to see it a couple times with Flinders, and then it will start to go back up again. In terms of the population size estimates, I'm using a marker capture framework. So again, like the more data that we have, the more confident we can be based on, I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar with marker capture. I won't go into it too much right now, but it's basically taking a sample of marked animals and then waiting a period of time and taking another sample and seeing how many from the second batch were already marked from the first time, and then basically extrapolating as a proportion when you do that over and over and over to be able to say something about the population size. So that in theory can help us with like that situation where they're kind of moving off and on if we've got sampling over several years. But yeah, and so with our project, another thing I should mention is we can't track fine scale movements. We basically are just assigning each sea dragon to a dive site. Within what we know about their home ranges, we can definitively pretty much say that if they're at Rapid Bay, they're not going to turn up, in another place that's a certain distance away from that. So our next steps for South Australia we are focused on collecting data from all locations here because we really don't have any at this point that have robust enough data to be able to do population size estimates or other things that we want to do. So data collection from all locations and from all points in time, as I mentioned before, especially with what I'm doing with the population sizes, it's really, really valuable to be able to demonstrate, for example, for the red list, if I can have population sizes from different points in time and potentially be able to demonstrate declines and differentiate also between boom and bust cycles versus like steady declines over like 10 to 20 years. And those are some of the criteria that assessments like the red list really hinge on, are being able to demonstrate that, and again, across their distribution. And then my PhD chapters are those three things that we already kind of talked about a bit. In terms of reproduction, some of the main things that I'm looking at are when breeding starts and ends in different places. And so we've actually started, I think we've done it 3 years now, a first broods contest, where the first person in each state to submit a photo of a brooding male sea dragon gets a SeadragonSearch coffee mug, which is very exciting, and also the glory of having one for their state. So, and then for states like South Australia that have both species, there's 2 mugs. There's a winner for leafies and for weedies. And so, yeah, we try to find fun ways to incentivize the data collection that's going to answer the questions that need to be answered. And so the first breeds contest, we need to continue looking at this for several more years at least to be able to confidently say what those timelines are in different places. But it's been really interesting so far. We've been seeing broods as early as June in Western Australia and New South Wales, and then later for Victoria and South Australia. We had our first winner from South Australia this year, actually, for a leafy. And in Tasmania as well, they tend to start more around October. By November, it's happening everywhere. Everybody has eggs, and that's when people are seeing a lot of juveniles in the water. So I'm interested in quantifying that, and then again being able to compare it to the temperatures in different places and other physical ocean variables. And then also looking at how many broods can a sea dragon have in one breeding season. Some people who are in the water all the time have said they think 4 is possible. We know for sure 2 is possible because we've seen it in the photos already. But again, the more data we can get, kind of going back to that time series example here, if this was filled out, we could use photos like these to be able to tell when a brood is fresh and when it's finished and when it started a new brood, and be able to figure out sort of what the averages are for sea dragons in different places.
How long is the breeding season? Like how rough it is? No, not that substance.
It seems to start I guess around October, November, it seems to have started everywhere, but it's starting much earlier, it seems, and on each coast. It seems to last into March, April. Yeah. And that we've even seen broods as late as May in some places. So they're just trailing off in May and then just trickling in June. But the hot time is November, December, January. But yeah, hopefully in a few more years, we'll be able to see for sure in different places, have a nice little infographic with that information. And then just one other part of my PhD research that I wanted to mention is I'm also interested in citizen science and why people participate in it and how we make it better, because it's definitely on the rise. Citizen science projects popping up everywhere. But the question is, are researchers getting what they need out of them, and are the participants getting what they need out of them? Because citizen science projects should theoretically have that reciprocal relationship where everybody is benefiting. So another aspect of SeadragonSearch is that if you go to our website and click on the participate button, there's a link that will take you to a survey. And the survey takes about 10 minutes to fill out, maybe less if you go quickly. And then at the end of the survey, you can volunteer for an individual interview. And that's with me. And we do that over a phone call or a video chat, and basically just talk about sea dragons for an hour and about why. I ask people, why are you interested in sea dragons? Why did you start participating in this project? All the questions about what their experience has been, both positive and negative. What are our areas for growth? What do you want to see more of? And it's been so much fun to do. I was telling Stefan earlier that other than diving with sea dragons, this is my favorite part of my PhD, is getting to talk to our participants, because they're amazing people. And there are some common themes that are emerging about why people want to participate, but there's also a lot of differences. People participate for different reasons. And so my goal with this is sort of twofold, because I want to be able to inform the development of this project going forward and make sure, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but we want to run this for at least 10 years to be able to get that nice, long, distribution-wide, robust data set over significant period. No, this is, my PhD. My PhD is just this this little initial part of it where I'm answering some of the questions, but my supervisors are going to stick with it for the long haul. They wanted to run it for at least the lifespan of a sea dragon, which when we started, people guessed was about 10 years. But now that we know they can live to 16, they're thinking, okay, we might have to run it for a lot longer. So we'll see what happens with that. But it's going to be long-term either way. And so we really want to make sure that people are getting what they want out of it so that they're going to want to stick with us for the long haul. And so in this process, I want to inform the development of SeadragonSearch, but also put out a publication that can help other citizen science projects as well, best practices. Although I would say so far that even just dialoguing with your participants should be a best practice in every citizen science project, because you really can't take for granted or make assumptions about why people are participating. And yeah, it's incredibly interesting and fun to do. So that's another ongoing thing, the red list reassessments. We might be able to do these for weedies within the next year. For leafies, it might take a little bit longer. We'll see. I don't want to commit to a time frame for either one of those, but we're definitely looking towards that because it can be a powerful tool for being able to make policy recommendations and get funding and things like that. And then other conservation planning applications. An example of this is they are, I believe, expanding a marine park in the southern part of Western Australia. And so the people who are working on that, Save Our Marine Life, they came to my supervisor, Nerida, and they asked her if she could provide Seadragon data to sort of beef up their proposal for that. And we actually found that one of the distribution records for the ruby sea dragon was like just slightly outside of the proposed area. It was in Commonwealth waters, but it was so close that it just made us think like, okay, this is yet another, like the applications just kind of keep coming for how we can use this data. And so to participate, this is our main website. It's just SeadragonSearch.org. And the main website has a lot of information on it. There's videos on how to submit photos. There is a blog that highlights different Sea Dragon related research that comes out. But if you click on the participate button, that will take you, there's an option in there where you can go to the reporting form, and that's where you actually upload photos. And also under participate is the link to the survey if you're interested in that. So it's fun to explore around on the website. And then just the other thing that I like to highlight about the website is that we have our code of conduct on there. And so this is something that you actually, before you submit a reporting form, you have to check a little box that says that you've read this. You have to do it every single time you report an encounter, just to remind people that this is really important. Just to pay attention to the sort of body language of sea dragons. Are they trying to swim away from you or rise up in the water or disappear into the weed? Like all those things are kind of signs to just like give them a little bit of space, or to be mindful if you're in a big group of how many people are taking photos or taking turns getting close or using flashes. We always say that for us, we just sort of need a side profile shot where we can see the patterning. It doesn't have to be an amazing photo. Even GoPro footage, stills pulled from GoPro videos sometimes even work. The machine learning tools surprise us with what they're able to work with. So when in doubt, just check it in the system and see what happens. And if it's not identifiable, we will let you know. But yeah, just the touching and taking thing, even if trying to help, I added that because with the parasites, I think people are often tempted to pick them off because they can look pretty horrible, especially when they're on the face. And it's a giant parasite on a sea dragon. But yeah, we just always try to remind people of just leave them be and give them as much space as possible. And of course, safe diving as well to protect yourself. Okay, and we have a Facebook group that is pretty vibrant. If any of you guys are on Facebook, you want to look for the group. That we also have a Facebook page, but the Facebook group is where all of the interesting conversations happen. And so these are just some examples of things that my supervisor Nerida and I post in there. I do a lot of the contests. So like there's our first fruits. We have monthly leaderboards where we highlight people who've contributed just a lot of encounters for that month. But Nerida is also really good about picking out interesting little insights as she's going through the data. So, for example, this dragon wasn't seen for 2 years and then popped back up again. So she highlighted both photographers that were involved in that. Sometimes animals will get injured, and people really like to see how the injuries heal over time and how sea dragons can survive or bounce back. So we'll post little series highlighting things like that. And the participants have also really taken over this group, and they post themselves all the time about weird things that they've observed, questions. People will answer each other's questions before me and Nerida can even get in there. So it's very, very dynamic. Well, that's everything I had prepared, but what else do you all want to know?